Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker, Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to the show. There's definitely a sort of chilly, wintry nip in the air. And of course today, Christmas is looming ever closer on the horizon. And I don't know about you, but I haven't got a clue how we're going to spend it. Well, after protracted talks with the devolved nations, Boris Johnson is expected to tell us all this week whether or not Christmas is cancelled, and if it's not cancelled, what form it will be allowed to take. The smart money is on not cancelled, of course, with a temporary lifting of restrictions for a few festive days to allow us to mix with family and friends. Tidings of comfort and joy, you might think. But there may well be a price to pay, not only in the form of another possible lockdown in January, but in a potential spike in infections. Last week, Susan Hopkins, medical advisor to Public Health England and Test and Trace, let slip that in the predicted 5 days of freedom, cases could double or quadruple, which raises the question, even if we are told we can have a normal Christmas, should we? What's the right thing to do? And with all the uncertainty and only a month to go, how are we all supposed to plan? Linda Buld is a professor of public health at the University of Edinburgh. Tom Solomon is chair of neurology and director of the National Institute for Health Research, Health Protection Research Unit in Emerging and Zoonotic Infections at the University of Liverpool. That is possibly the longest job title I've ever read. And finally, Alex Phillips, former Brexit Party member and member of the European Parliament, nice and snappy. Linda, if restrictions are lifted, are you going to be rushing to make plans?
I don't think so, Mariella. I mean, I think it's very difficult for everyone, and I fully understand the mental health aspects of the need to see each other at Christmas time, but we still have relatively high levels of infection in many parts of the UK. And given that we have a light at the end of the tunnel in the new year with vaccines and also better treatments, I really don't think now is the time for us to be rushing to lots of household mixing, particularly indoors. I think there's real risks associated with that.
Tom, what about you? Do you echo Linda's sentiments in terms of Christmas, moral responsibility, sticking to it and it'll go away faster?
Yes, I think I do agree with much of what Linda said. This is a chance now. We have the vaccine is coming on the horizon. It won't be the case that everybody has been vaccinated by Christmas by any means, but this is the only Christmas that we will be in this situation. And so we really have a responsibility to do what we can to keep the pandemic under control until the vaccines have the chance to kick in.
Alex, you've said that a one-size-fits-all policy isn't plausible because every family is different. So I'm guessing that you think that it's time people were allowed a little more freedom of expression.
Yeah, I think actually, look, health is not homogenous. We know that. And I think we now know the indicators of those people who are the most vulnerable, those people that need shielding. And actually also, we know the measures that we should take as individuals personally to make sure that we protect ourselves and those around us.
Tom, Alex mentioned there people's mental health, and it is a hugely important issue. I think we're just seeing more and more the impact that it's having, across the generation. So how can we measure the risk of the virus against the risk of worsening depression and anxiety? I mean, the problem with Christmas is, whether you care about Christmas or you don't care about Christmas, it is an incredibly emotive time, and people have a feeling of pressure, even if it's misplaced, about how it should be, how much it matters and how they should be involved with it?
Well, I think there's a mixture of issues here. First of all, to deal with the people's individual responsibility, I totally agree that people can make sensible decisions about not putting their loved ones, especially if they're elderly and frail, at risk. But remember, what part of the restrictions is not just about individuals who are frail getting sick. It's about keeping the pandemic under control as a whole. So, for example, we know that young people, school children, younger adults, don't get very sick. And so if we just say, well, that doesn't matter, they can mix as much as they want to, they won't get sick, but there'll be much more virus circulating in society, and then the vulnerable will get sick. And that's why we've had to have these lockdowns, to keep the overall numbers of sick people and hospitalised people under control. So the measures that we have are not just about keeping our own elderly and frail relatives well. It's about controlling virus circulation as a whole. And I do agree totally that mental health is very important. So we have to have a balance. I think if it was down to me, I would encourage. Personally, I think we can, as a society, we can survive one Christmas, which is not the same as every other Christmas. We've had this for all the other religious festivals this year, for Eid, for Ramadan, etc. And so I think we can survive a Christmas which is not the same. The one group I would be paying special attention to are people who are going to spend Christmas on their own. So I would say people who are going to spend Christmas on their own should be allowed to join a family. Personally, all this idea of, is it three groups
That's
or
the
four
talk.
groups or five groups?
Three family groups. Family groups.
I think that's too much. I don't see why we have to have 3, 4 or 5 people mixing for 5 days. I think Christmas Day is one day. I think those who are completely isolated shouldn't be on their own. But I think we just have to take the hit this Christmas in terms of what we're allowed to do. Just as we've done, we've spent months now not being able to go to pubs, go to restaurants, go to pop festivals, go to art festivals. We've spent months not being able to do the things we normally want to do. So I think a bit of moderation is needed here.
I guess the reason they're talking about 5 days is because if once you've dealt with the subject of Christmas, what happens for New Year? And that becomes a whole other, pile of pressure unless it's incorporated, I imagine, in the 5 days. We've had a message from a listener saying the moral thing to do at Christmas is to get over yourself and stay put. All the efforts thus far will be squandered. That's from Kay. And I know Kay is listening in Scotland. And of course, Alex, do you think that the divided nature of how all of these rules are being applied has also been quite an issue? Because obviously there are families who live partly in England, some of them live in Scotland, people might live in Wales, and yet everyone is under these different regimes, as it were, when it comes to the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I find this division and potential political point scoring from diverging on COVID approach, it has been totally farcical and a bit of a disgrace, frankly, because we are a country without borders. I'm from Gloucester, which is where I am right now, and I'm right on the border of Wales. If I go out for a hike in the Forest of Dean, it's very easy for me to accidentally walk into Wales, where pubs happen to be open. And I think that the big difficulty is if we're not showing a united front in all of this, it gets more and more confusing for people trying to follow the rules. And we've had so many lockdowns. Now we're hearing that the tiers are coming back, but actually there's going to be new rules within those tiers. It's like we need to keep, being updated every single day on what the latest manifestation of government policy is on COVID. And if people can't be given very clear and focused instructions and simple instructions, how are they supposed to follow them? And that leads on to the next big risk. And when it comes to talking about how many households can mix, so on and so forth, how are we policing that?
Indeed. Well, let's look to something slightly more positive, Tom, which is perhaps a quick word on the vaccine. How much has the news today about the Oxford vaccine changed the prospects for next year? But also, how likely are people to adopt it with the enthusiasm that we're adopting the news of it?
Yes, the Oxford news is good news. This is now the third vaccine where the data show that it clearly works. We have to put all these vaccines through the regulatory process before they can be approved for use. And that regulatory process is looking at how well they work and also checking the safety. And that's happening quickly because the people who sit on these committees are meeting night and day and over the weekends. So we will be in a position where we'll be vaccinating in December. And we may well have had many, many people vaccinated by Easter. So I think all of this is very positive. Most people, I think, do want to get vaccinated and will get vaccinated. But I think the risk is that we have some people who feel very strongly against all vaccines and any vaccines. And that's fine for them to have their personal feelings and not get vaccinated. But when they start spreading untruths via the internet and social media, and that then makes others concerned about using the vaccines, that's when I think we start getting into difficulty.
Tom Solomon, Professor at the University of Liverpool, and Alex Phillips, former Brexit Party MEP, thank you both very much. In the next half hour, we remember the life and times of Eric Mark, the last of the secret listeners who eavesdropped on Nazi generals in the Second World War. And we talk to our correspondent on the ground in Madrid. But first, the latest headlines with Rachel Jewell.